Okay, so welcome back to the next session in the Global Foresight Summit. We are this year hosting the whole summit with the APF and the WFR. And we have now Josef Hargrave. I don't know if I said your surname, the last
perfect.
name.
Yeah, perfect.
So it's very difficult sometimes to say the names of everyone from so many different places. But Josef has a background in biology. And somehow he ended up in innovation management and corporate foresight. And he has spent the last 9 years working at the global design, engineering, and consulting firm Arup. So Josef is going to be with us today talking about how to design for the new normal and how to use foresight for the future of the built environment. So Josef, I leave you on the stage and I leave everything on your side. I step back, and if you need anything, I will be just here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you also for the opportunity to present today. If anyone has any comments or questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just paste them into the little chat box. Also, if you want to share where you're joining from today, that would also be fantastic to read. So please feel free to ask questions, and I'll try to answer them towards the end of the presentation. So yes, so a little bit about me to start off and set the scene. Like we've already heard, my first degree was really in biology, and that was where I learned about systems thinking and the idea that systems evolve and systems develop over time, and that there's often many different influencing factors that determine the shape of a system. After that, I studied innovation management at Manchester Business School, and that gave me a bit more of the context of that type of thinking in the world of business and finance and economics. So because again, you know, the man-made world and man-made economies very much follow the principles of biology and evolutionary theory. My first real job was at Z-Punkt, the Foresight company in Germany, working with a fantastic set of colleagues there and learning really, you know, the basics of foresight methodology. Then I moved to London and set up my own consultancy for a few years where I learned about management. And then in the last 10 years, I've really been working at Arup, learning about the built environment, and for the last 2 years now, acting as the global foresight leader at Arup, really trying to develop the foresight function in all of our regions and try to deliver this as a differentiator, both for Arup as a company itself, as well as for our clients. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in practice. A few words about Arup as a company. For those who do not know us, we are a professional services firm focused on design, engineering, and advisory for the built environment. And that is anything from the macro scale, the planning of cities and the advice of governments, to the micro scale, the design of building systems or lighting components. So we're really kind of straddling all these different areas and sectors that are related to the man-made world, and increasingly also the natural world. And we'll get to some of that later in terms of some of the themes that are of critical importance to us now. There's 16,000 of us in almost 90 offices. And so foresight is a function within Arup that acts both as a service for the rest of the firm, so an internal function, if you like, as well as an advisory function for external clients. Now, there's two kind of core strategic priorities for the firm at the moment, more broadly. One of them is the continued digital transformation of our sector. The built environment sector and construction sector is perhaps a little bit behind compared to other sectors. So there's lots of opportunities there to increase the efficiency of what we do. And the second theme is the idea of sustainable development and us becoming a much more sustainable sector, adopting principles such as the circular economy, thinking about new ways to integrate nature into cities, and also, you know, new materials and new approaches to design, full stop. at Foresight specifically, our mission is really to understand change, identify opportunities for our firm and our clients, and to enable the shift towards a more sustainable future. And we have been going as a team within Arup for almost 20 years now, and really provide a range of different products and services and tools for the inside and the outside world to help people have meaningful conversations about change. And it ranges from our Inspire Insights platform, which is a platform that's openly available on global case studies for innovation in the built environment, to more specific and confidential client work. Now, the strategic role of Foresight at Arup can really be summarized into three different distinct areas and associated operating models, if you like. The first one is where we work for Arup, and that's really about the transformation of our people and our business. So the role of Foresight in enabling the long-term transformation and adaptation of our firm. So what are the trends, what are the transformations that are shaping the future of our business that we should know about and we have to incorporate into our strategy, decision-making, and the development of our people. The second category is the so-called working with Arup. So that's about the transformation of our products and services. And this is where we bring in Foresight methodologies or Foresight modules, such as a workshop on trends or visioning exercise or scenario planning exercise, to enhance the value proposition and service offerings of others. So this might be Foresight as part of a planning program, or Foresight as part of a building design project, or Foresight as part of a wider advisory services offering. So it's about differentiation in many ways and increased value propositions. And then the last one is the transformation of our partners and clients. And this is where we go out and win work for the firm, providing, if you like, more pure Foresight consulting services to the market, and typically with a focus on the built environment. So often for chemical companies or automotive companies that are trying to understand the built environment, and we are there to then combine our Foresight expertise with the firm's technical expertise to provide those services. And this is important for Arup and for us as an organization, because we are in a market that is constantly changing, and organizations only adapt if their employees adapt. So this is really about figuring out how our future might be different and what that means for how we need to adapt our people, our strategy, our investments to really continue to thrive and grow and evolve in the future. And we've got a global team, about 30 or so Foresight professionals. We are growing at the moment, covering all of Arup's 5 major regions: the Americas, Europe, UK, IMEA, East Asia, and Australasia. And so we have a presence and teams in all those regions, the biggest team being in London, and then smaller functions and centers of excellence all over the world. And these are, if you like, our 4 key offerings. We do trend studies, we do a lot of future scenarios and visioning projects. We increasingly also do innovation strategy, where it's about turning insights into opportunities. And then we also have this specific focus on the idea of sustainable future. So services around how to implement the circular economy, how to explore what a more regenerative future looks like, and so forth. And we'll get to some more kind of trend-specific insights in a second. And our USP is really the idea of Foresight expertise. So we have a range of experts that know all the core Foresight methodologies, with sector expertise, such as our water business or our energy business or our transport business, which can bring that deep knowledge of how these sectors are evolving, as well as our technical expertise, where we have engineers, architects, designers, and all kinds of different disciplines that can bring this deep technical knowledge to our projects. And it's a combination of those really that creates the value: the Foresight with the sector, with the technical expertise. Now, change is constant. Most organizations like Arup and our clients and the projects that we work on are actually driven by the same core trends and drivers, one could argue. You know, we are all being shaped by climate change, by shifts in resource consumption, by shifts in consumer behavior, and so forth. So while change is constant, the trends and drivers are often very, very similar. The key challenge that we have in our organization and in almost all Foresight projects that anyone ever does is the idea of context, because context is always variable. So how trends will impact a specific place, organization, or project is always context dependent. And that is really the core challenge of most of the projects that we do, is to understand that context and to develop that context so that we can gain meaningful insights of how specific trends are shaping our specific future. So why does that matter, perhaps specifically for an organization like Arup that is active in the built environment? Well, if we support, for example, the design of a new building or the design of a new infrastructure project, such as a rail corridor, often the idea might happen today, and then it takes a long time to go through the concept phase, feasibility, organizing the finance, doing the actual planning and design, then doing the construction. And sometimes from idea to first operation of this asset, it can be up to 10 or even 20 years at times. And then, of course, you've got the operational timeline itself, which then can be another 10, 20, 30 years. So sometimes you're designing something today that will still be there in 50 years' time. So this time horizon of the future is always part of the projects that Arup does. So that means we have to try to understand the future context, the future operating context of these new assets, new buildings, or these new solutions. So this can include shifts in demographics and lifestyles, new climatic environmental conditions, shifts in policy and regulation, and so forth. And the questions we then always try to ask ourselves when it comes to this future context is, what would we like to know about the future? What should we know about the future? And what do we absolutely have to know about the future to make better decisions today? And this is where you can then argue that, foresight is not about the future. Foresight is about the present and making better decisions today. And that's often something, we get asked, well, if you're thinking about the future, what does that matter for me today? Well, this is a great example of that. It's all about making better decisions today. And again, the challenge is then to go from abstract evidence about the future, which can be trends or benchmarks, observations, or conversations we have in workshops, to tangible and context-specific impacts. What does it mean for the design of my new airmail distribution center, or the space requirement for my new university building? What does it mean for my corporate strategy, how I invest in innovation, processes inside of the company, and so forth? And so this process in between the abstract and the tangible is really what's so critical to get right. And that's where conversation, prioritization, and contextualization can happen through workshops, through deep analysis, through all kinds of other foresight processes, if you like, that take us from the abstract to the tangible. And that's, if you like, again, in the slide, the core challenge of many, many projects that we do is, how do you translate a trend into a specific impact for design? Now, an example of this is the aging population. We all know that globally, the proportion of 60 years and older people will grow quite significantly between today and 2100. Looking at one example of Germany, we know that then has a big impact on the population pyramid. We go from, today, where the pyramid has a really nice shape in terms of most of the people being in the working age population, so they're contributing to pensions and paying taxes, and the economy has enough workers, to a population in 2054 where the working age has shrunk and slimmed down quite a bit. And you can see that also the proportion of people who are in the oldest old category, or if you like, 80, 90 plus, has really increased massively. So what does this mean? And the logic that we can then apply in most of these instances is really the idea of having a trend, the what, so the aging population, there being a set of implications, the so what, so increase in age-related illness, shifts in the proportion of working age population, and so forth, to the action, the now what. So, for example, the development of novel healthcare services, a shift towards more age-friendly urban design solutions, and an analysis of implications for future pension provisions. So you can go from quite an abstract trend, the aging population, to something quite specific, such as an age-friendly urban design guide. And this is, just a high-level example of some of the logics that we're trying to go through whenever we have a trend like that, to contextualize it in terms of what it means for us. And of course, the process of contextualization will always vary depending on what project we are doing. The other thing to say is that in general, for us in the built environment and for humanity, the challenges that we are trying to tackle today are all focused on the transformation of complex systems. And that's where the idea of biology and system dynamics and evolution all come back into it. And this, in many ways, requires an integrated approach across multiple components, actors, and domains, which is often not easy to achieve. We're much better at working in silo than we are in working, across disciplines in general. And so climate change, the circular economy, all of these big things that we're trying to solve, they're systems challenges. And that's why it's important to think in systems and try to work across disciplines whenever we can. Talking about this a little bit more, and one of the key paradigms for the future that we are currently exploring, well, if we look at the kind of the emerging risk of climate change, and this is an example of projected change in suitability for human habitation in 2070 in a 2 to 2.5 degree warming scenario, and you can see that lots of parts of the world are becoming increasingly less suitable for human habitation because of temperature increases and humidity increases, and lots are outside of the historical human niche, which is really, really significant if you look at all that red space there, where it could become very, very uncomfortable for people to live if climate change reaches this 2 to 2.5 degree warming scenario. What we can do then as a firm and as individuals is we can start to model future climate realities. And this is, if you like, a technical approach to foresight where we can take these details from the IPCC, and when we design a new master plan or a new part of the city or building, we can model what the temperature will be like in different parts of that space in a different climatic future, and we can start to then adapt to that and think about what it means for the cooling load of a building or the heating load of a building, or how much shading is required, or how much green should be added to the environment to minimize heat island effects. So we can start to design for the future, for the new normal, rather than today's present situation. Another thing that we can do is to, model future risks a little bit more and build much more adaptable forms of infrastructure. So this is an image of modeling surface water flooding risk in Copenhagen in Denmark, and you can see that certain streets and certain areas are of particularly high risk. We can then start to think about how we can design infrastructure solutions that are much more adaptable and responsive to that risk. So here's a street in normal climatic conditions, and this is what the street would look like if there was a high degree of surface water flooding. So the park area, the green space in the middle, acts as a water retention feature, ensuring that the drainage system is not overloaded, and as a consequence, there's a much lower risk of surface water flooding. So this is the kind of smart, adaptable infrastructure that we have to think about much more as a firm and as a sector as we go into this future, which will be very different, for example, from a climatic perspective than what we are used to today. The other thing that we are now proposing and working on as a firm is this overall long-term shift towards regenerative design. Now, what do we mean by that? If we think about our current status around sustainability, it's very much about minimizing negative externalities and minimizing ecological loss. So producing less waste, minimizing carbon emissions, and so forth. What we really have to do now is change the dialogue and change the narrative towards something that's much more focused on ecological gain and improving the environments and improving the ecosystems that we've already destroyed. So restorative approaches where biodiversity is enhanced, water quality is enhanced, spaces are regreened, ecosystems are recovering, towards a future of regenerative design where that kind of self-reinforcing biological living system continuously regenerates itself and restores itself towards a much better balance of both human and natural health and well-being. And so this is something that we're exploring at the moment, what it means for us as a firm, what it means in terms of design approaches. And it's a very, very exciting time and a very, very different paradigm towards this understanding of, a shift from the approach of sustainability, then towards this idea of much more restorative approaches to design, and finally the idea of regenerative design, which is about reinventing systems, enabling a holistic human and planetary health, designing integrated and self-sustaining living systems, and then also achieving the outcome, which is about restored environmental health and self-adapting systems. Now, this definition which I'm showing on the screen and this table isn't perfect. It's our current best working assumption and definition, and we are working to refine and develop this further, because no one has yet really perfectly described what regenerative design really looks like. And so that is one of the things that we as a team are exploring at the moment, and we look forward to gaining some further insights in that space. So please see this table as a draft. But in general, it's about the idea that historically we have these human-made systems and we have these natural systems and cycles, and they are somewhat separated. Yes, we are exploiting many natural systems and cycles, but we are still treating them as separate. Going forward, we have to think much more about integrated and regenerative systems that bring together the idea of human and planetary health, and think about it much more as a holistic and integrated system, if you like. Because, you know, what we have to achieve, and this is by an organization called Nature Positive, is really, you know, moving away from this idea of losing nature and decline biodiversity to really, you know, a full recovery of many of the ecosystems that we've destroyed by 2050 and beyond, so that we can re-enhance the planet, you know, live much more sustainable in a much more regenerative world, and, you know, reverse some of the damage that we've done to date. So in many ways, you know, the foresight work that we do in the context of some of these paradigms, in the context of this contextualization, is really about identifying preferable futures. If we think about, you know, the futures cone and the scenario cone, where we have that area of the possible, and then the more probable scenario, the business as usual, in the middle, and then perhaps the more preferable is outside the realm of the possible. But it's important to really think about what our preferable future looks like, and so that, you know, we can influence and make decisions that take us towards that. And then the other thing, which is always true of these exercises as well when we do foresight, is that it's, you know, also an invitation to understand the present, an invitation to understand system complexity and different components. Because if you do not understand fully the shape and function of a system today, it's much harder to then accurately predict how that system might evolve in the future. So exercises around foresight are also, as a consequence, often explorations of the present as much as they are explorations of the future. And just to, you know, a nice quote by Elon that talks about, you know, why foresight is you know, why this branch of possibility and these scenarios are so interesting. He said at TED in 2017, I look at the future from a standpoint of probabilities. It's like a branching stream of probabilities. It's where we get back to this, you know, scenario cone, if you like. And there are actions that we can take that affect those probabilities, or that accelerate one thing and slow down another. And for me, that's in many ways what foresight is about. It's about doing projects, having conversations, influencing people, so that we impact certain probabilities towards a much more sustainable, equitable, and better future for all of us. So it's not about prediction, but it's about influencing the right probabilities. We've done some work on this, our 2050 scenarios. You can access them on arup.com and have a look at them. They're about the interplay of planetary health and societal condition. And there's some very interesting scenarios in there. If we think about the desire to increase planetary health, there's the option of the greentocracy versus the post-Anthropocene. And it's interesting to see which one is preferred by different audience members. If we look at the, you know, the comparison between the four scenarios, there's really ranges in terms of climate change implications, population size, wealth gap, and, you know, the amount of extreme weather. Then if we look at one of them, the post-Anthropocene, as the one which really combines this improved societal condition with improved planetary health, we have a story about open borders and, you know, people being free to move across the world, very, very strong carbon accounting. So the cost of carbon is really incorporated in all goods and services, a pattern of sustainable consumption, and a much greener economy where public-private partnerships support the, you know, the idea of planet first. And if this is really the preferred future that we want to move towards, then, you know, what are the kind of things that we need to do as individuals, organizations, and society to get there? And that's then an interesting vision that can act as an anchor point for us all as we move towards the future. And what that could mean, you know, for the built environment again, and for the kind of structures that we design or that we engage with, it's about being human-centered. It's about taking circular design approaches, being inclusive and equitable in the built environment, taking integrated approaches, having adaptive infrastructure, using digital technologies for spaces to be intelligent and responsive, achieving regenerative design, making the most of the opportunities of automation and robotics, being innovative in everything that we do and challenging our own perception of things, then also designing for resilience and being ready to operate and act and live in a world that is very different to what we're used to today. So finally, some personal reflections from me after quite a few years of doing Foresight. Trends are easy and context is hard. Identifying the change is often the simple bit. Contextualizing it is the hard bit. So we really, as professionals, have to focus on this contextualization much more. We can and we cannot predict the future. If you think about some trends like the aging population, it's actually quite easy to predict the future. In other instances, it's much harder. So we have to also be, conscious of that, which trends are easier or harder to predict. We should focus on possibility and probability, like that quote from Elon. We want to impact positive probability. So these are really two key terms to focus on. Conversations shape our and your future. Workshops and debates and dialogue is typically what makes the biggest difference, and we can tell stories that enable those conversations. It is critical for organizations to have this adaptive capacity, whether that's a foresight function or a culture of innovation. Organizations need to find way to constantly adapt and evolve, both in terms of the people and the services and the things we do. And foresight is not only about the future. It's critically also about a deeper understanding of the present. And that's, something that comes up time and time again. It's about making better decisions today. It's about understanding how a system works today. And then we talk about, how things are going to evolve in the coming years. Finally, there's a few resources that you can access on inspire.arup.com. It's our insights database. Currently over 14,000 members and over 2,000 interesting case studies around, how to design and operate a better built environment. And then there's also our thought leadership, which you can access through our microsite, which is foresight.arup.com, a range of kind of publicly available research, such as the scenarios, but also stuff on COVID, and of course our Future of and Cities Alive series. So I'll finish there. Please do get in touch if you've got any questions or comments. I'll stop sharing my screen in a second and have a look at any kind of questions or comments in the chat. But yeah, feel free to get in touch or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to also continue the conversation beyond today's presentation. So thanks for listening and all the best for the rest of the summit. Okay.
Josef, you have a few questions already in the comments.
Yes.
You can go through them, and I put them on the screen for everyone to read if you tell me which ones.
So I need to read them real quick. So the first one is from Jacobus van Rooyen. Maybe we bring that one up. So, do you experience an increase in the needs as a result of COVID? So we've always been quite busy in doing foresight inside of Arup, and it's a very kind of established function. What I would say in response to that question is that our focus shifted a little bit and has shifted a little bit towards a greater focus on COVID within our work. So we haven't necessarily done more, but the proportion of stuff that we've done on COVID has increased. And in general, of course, there is, a recognition, I guess, by business leaders and by partners that we do live in a world of uncertainty, and COVID has in many ways highlighted that. And so perhaps there is a greater need and expectation now and role for foresight for businesses and organizations to, navigate some of that uncertainty, which of course, remains. At the moment in our sector, there's a big debate about the future of commercial buildings and offices, and what will be the future of work, and how will we adapt buildings towards the needs of this new way of working once the dust settles and we have a bit better understanding of what the new equilibrium between home and office working looks like. So the next question. One challenge with the preferable future is the denial of the probable future. The space between it is what's called the land of dreams and disappointments. Tipping the balance is the capability space. I think it's really interesting comment, Marcus, and I guess that's why we always that's why the logic of scenarios is to develop them and explore them in multiples and not in individual scenarios, so that we have the contrast between them, the conflict between them, and you can start to also explore how your skills, your capability, and your strategy might fare in each of them. And so I think that's why it is so important to explore scenarios and multiples. There is, however, also I think a space or a purpose for preferable futures, or in some ways you could describe them also as visions. So what does our kind of best case outcome looks like? We do a lot of visions for new buildings. So for example, university campuses, or recently an airmail distribution center in Hong Kong. To really think about, okay, what are the requirements of this building? And if we got everything right, what would be the experience? And those kind of best case future visions for specific buildings or specific parts of the built environment can sometimes be extremely helpful in then helping the client and various stakeholders really agree and understand what they collectively want to achieve, and that can then be translated and given to an architect, and they can turn that into actual design requirements. So I think there's a space for both. We have Derek, an old Arup employee. Hi, Derek. Thanks for that comment. So we have the question also from Derek: to what degree can you influence policy in respect to the new materials to solve emerging and longer term issues? Yeah, it's a great question, because this question of who we actually want and need to influence to make and achieve the most change is something that is of significant importance. So we do try to increasingly try to deliver also research that can influence policy or regulatory mechanisms, such as, for example, quite detailed research that the firm has done, not Foresight has done, on making a circular economy real for the European built environment sector. So that's an example that is targeted also on influencing policy. And then at the moment, as a team, we are doing some research on how to achieve a net zero future, and what really the levers for change are within that, and what the different actors are within that again ecosystem of change, and how we can influence policy in that space to achieve transformation at scale across various sectors, such as the built environment sector, transport, housing, and energy in particular. So not a perfect answer to your question, but something that we recognize as increasingly important. And then, yes, a follow-up question from Marcus. Explicit questions include: do we have the capabilities needed to make our preferred future a reality? I guess, great question again. I guess the goal sometimes, not always, but sometimes also, of a preferred future is to then do that gap analysis and try to understand what additional skills and capabilities we actually need to develop to achieve that future. And that is, if you like, a strategic aim again of Foresight at Arup, is to enable the transformation of us as a business. And that means that we can impact as a team the research the firm invests in, the learning the firm does, and also the development of new skills and skills network, which is, if you like, the technical groups of people that specialize on certain technical skills, so that we have the capabilities, for example, within regenerative design practice or other emerging fields, that allow us to provide services, advice, and transform towards that preferable future. So it's sometimes not a question of whether it's there today, but also to use the process to identify what's missing. Yeah. And another question from Marcus, which is fine. So how do cities manage the policy changes dealing with a state government or feds that have a different view? It's a great question, and there's lots of interesting work done by an organization called C40, which is someone that Arup also regularly partners with. Most of the reports provide really interesting insights into the powers of cities, so the things they can influence versus the things they cannot influence. So it depends, obviously, what country you're in and the specific remit of the mayor. But typically, mayors are becoming more powerful with devolved kind of decision-making opportunities. And what typically was focused on transport now, in some cases, also includes health, and so and other sectors for that matter. And so the opportunity for cities cities to self-determine some of those things and make those decisions is in my view probably increasing, at least in some parts of the world. And as a consequence, mayors have the ability to make policy decisions for their city, which follow the vision that they want to put in place around sustainability or health and well-being, or the shape of the urban economy. And in many cases, one could argue that cities are moving much faster than national governments on issues such as climate change and creating more livable and healthy environments. And that is because cities are not competing with their national economy, they are competing with other major cities, and as a consequence there's pressure for them to create an environment that attracts talent, that attracts investment and so forth, and so they are competing on a slightly different area. The next one from Greening Futures: do you consider 3D printing a positive move towards regenerative design? I wouldn't say that it's the sole component or that it's critical for regenerative design, but regenerative design is really the idea of rethinking all aspects of how we design and operate and maintain the built environment. And so 3D printing will be a component of that. As a firm, we use 3D printing a lot for efficiency gains, in particular in material use, and for the achievement of more complex shapes and forms. So there's a lot of kind of digital fabrication developments happening at the moment, and we are trying to be at the forefront of what that means for what we can design and how we can design, in particular, like I said, for more complex structures, for weight reduction and for reduction in material use. And of course, this could be seen as a component of regenerative design if we also change partially the materials that we use within that. Martin, strong in planning and preparation. What about anticipation for emergence? Does this factor into the process? I'm not 100% sure whether I understand that question, but I guess what you're trying to say is this idea of horizon scanning and identifying emerging issues. And I guess as a team, yeah, this is one of the things we do on a continuous basis. It's part of our efforts for our Inspire database, where we regularly review various sources and bits of information, and then try to make sense of what that means for new trends and developments. So it's the idea of identifying those weak signals and combining them into what emerging issues might evolve from that. Yeah, Marcus, C40. If you Google C40 cities, you'll find their website. It's an organization focused on climate reduction in cities. Another question from Derek: can you say more about the integration of Arup's work with other intelligent urban systems and adjacent functions like firefighting? I mean, we have specialisms in fire engineering. We have a fantastic and world-class fire engineering team in Arup that do a lot of decision making and design recommendations for how to deal with fires. Both work in informal settlements and how to improve the fire safety of informal settlements, advising on the fire safety of tall buildings and designing fire systems for buildings, as well as general advice on regulations for fire safety around new emerging themes such as timber buildings. So there's lots and lots of work happening in that space as part of a kind of specialist function in fire. And then Osma, how to integrate city policies, mobility, housing in the future around the territorial paradigm. I'm not quite sure, Osma, what you mean by territorial paradigm. If you could add another comment, that would be great. In the future around the territorial paradigm. Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. But if you could clarify, then I'll try to answer. And I think that's all of the questions for now. If I've missed a question and you would like me to answer it again, then please kind of repeat it in the chat. And yeah, for now, a huge thanks for everyone that has asked questions, and thanks for listening as well.
Yes, and also, Joseph, we have about around 3 more minutes, so we can wait and see if Osmar is clarifying that territorial paradigm.
Yep.
But the work you're doing in Arup is great. I mean, it's been 20 years thinking about the future of cities.
What's that? Sorry, I was just reading the chat and got distracted.
Don't worry. I said that the work that you've been doing in Arup during the last 20 years, it has been evolving a lot into the practice of foresight that you have right now, which is very consolidated inside the organization, but also outside.
Yes, that's been one of the evolutions of the team inside of Arup has been perhaps a team that was at the beginning a little bit more not isolated, but allowed to work on its own and kind of explore the future in independently and as kind of free thinking think tank, if you like, to now a function that is quite deeply integrated into the function and operation of the business. And the latter has really then changed also the strategic importance of foresight for the firm, because all of the senior leaders know about our foresight function. We regularly get pulled into client bids and strategy processes, and as a consequence, we're now an integral part of how the firm functions and evolves over time. And this is really what we're trying to achieve: is this, having this influence, and particularly internally, so that we are not a segregated function, but we are really an integrated part of the business that can influence how others think, and we can learn from them, and they can learn from us, and we can also set a direction that again allows Arup to evolve over time.
And I want to wrap the session in there, because one of the biggest issues for most organizations when they are trying to adopt foresight is not to use foresight internally. They are very reluctant to change the culture, and they tend to want to use foresight as something that is going to produce the outputs right away for them, when it's like a marathon. It's something that you start and it's going to end like in a very long time when you change the culture internally. By the way, you have Osmar's clarification on the paradigm, so we can answer his question now.
Yeah, so this kind of this integrated thinking approach, Osmar, is something that we're trying to do more and more. I mean, at Arup, we have this idea of total architecture, total design, which really brings together loads of different disciplines to solve engineering challenges. And I think, we have to when we do a big planning process, for example, for a new city district or for a new part of town or whatever, really, we increasingly have to force this holistic thinking. And we often use the classic STEEP framework for that, to ensure that we think about all the social factors, the technological factors, the economic, ecological, and political factors. Because if we don't think in that system and we take into account, like you said, the policy angle or the ecological angle, then we're often not taking account of all the factors that really matter in making a place great and achieving the design outcomes that we're setting ourselves.
So, Joseph, thank you very much for being with us today. You have a few more clarifications in the comments about emergence and different elements of using things we don't know about the future, rather than using only the things that we know and can imagine. But the presentation has been great on how to adopt foresight, create a unit in a company of 16,000 people, which is impressive how you are engaging that. And I wanted to thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session. And everyone else, we are continuing now with another session, so you just don't move from the website or the stream on YouTube, and it will change automatically.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks all for your comments. And thanks, Derek, for the final clarification. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.